Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. I am Jacquelyn Melinek. As he mentioned, I'm a senior crypto reporter at TechCrunch, and I'm here with Jeremy Millar. It's not Millar, actually. And he is the Chief Development Officer at Consensys. Right, Jeremy?
Yep.
So I guess to let the audience know a little bit more about you, can you kind of tell us how you got into Consensys, this world, and what brought you here? I know you've been here for a while, but prior to that, what were you up to?
Yeah, in 2015, I was working in venture capital and was looking at various forms of future fintech and started exploring what was going on in Bitcoin and crypto more generally, and talked to everyone in the space at the time and wrote a big research piece on it that got read hundreds of thousands of times, and decided I was gonna do it full time and spend a bunch of time with a bunch of companies, and ended up, spending more time with Joe and Consensys than anyone else. It was maybe 20 people, 30 people at Consensys at the time, and joined formally in April 2016, I think.
And then looking at Consensys, the last conversation was about all things Bitcoin, and I feel like Consensys kind of has a focus on Ethereum. I know you mentioned that you have a multi-chain vision, but can you kind of tell us about your position there?
Yeah, well, a lot of our position in the Ethereum ecosystem is historic. Joe was a co-founder of Ethereum, and there are various tellings of what happened, but sort of our perspective, or Joe's perspective on it, is, after the network was launched, Joe felt passionately that there should be a software company building software for Ethereum between sort of the beta launch and the mainnet going live, and he sought out engineers and entrepreneurs to go and do that. Consensys began as a venture production studio where we had at one point over 100 companies that we were building or working with, and more recently now as two separate entities, Mesh.xyz, that continues sort of the venture production route, but also Consensys, or Consensys Software Inc., which is home to MetaMask and Infura and some of the core Ethereum tools. But we very much do believe in a multi-protocol, multi-chain world, and our products are designed to work that way. And probably one of the biggest areas of development over the last certainly 2 years has been working on multi-chain support and multi-protocol support in all of our products.
So I know the conference started today, but some of the major sectors I'm hearing conversations around, especially in Korea, are gaming, institutional involvement, and investing in this space. I'm curious at a high level, do you agree with that? And then why are those three areas so topical right now?
Yeah, I think that's pretty aligned with a lot of what we're seeing. I think there are other things too, but to take each of those, I think gaming, there's a number of factors why gaming is important. Obviously, we've seen some success with things like Axie. We've seen some other sort of fan engagement platforms do fairly well. Some of the stuff around football and card trading games are doing fairly well. But I think the real reason why gaming is such a hot topic is so much money went into gaming 18 months ago. And so if you look at where venture capital funding went during the last bull market, say between, summer of or fall of 21 and the spring of 22, before things blew up, the biggest area of venture investment in crypto was in games. And so there's a whole bunch of money that's gone into AAA games that are going to be released over the next 6 to 12 months. So there's just a bunch of titles in the pipeline that are coming. And corresponding with the production of the titles is obviously a whole bunch of innovation, sort of, various people call it different things, app chains, L3s, proprietary, self-developed L2s, however you want to describe it, has been going alongside that. And so, there's a whole ecosystem. There's a whole ecosystem in crypto growing up around games right now, but there haven't been so many hits yet. So I think that explains it. On the institutional side, obviously you've seen some announcements predominantly in the US, but also elsewhere, around institutional appetite for launching products, whether they're ETFs or other products that can bring in, ultimately more retail money or institutional money is exciting. In particular, we've seen, softening regulatory stances, particularly in Asia, which we think is hugely positive. And then on the investment side, under hashtag not financial advice, buy the dip. I think there is a general sense in crypto that the level of activity in the builder community when you come to events like this is as high as it's ever been, right? While there are concerns around the ability to raise money in the current market, regardless of what sector you're in. If you're in venture right now and you need to raise money in the next 6 months, you better have good metrics. And probably doubly true if you're in crypto. But many of the crypto companies are well funded. So I think the investment thesis around our sector generally right now is, given the level of technical innovation that we're seeing, given the level of compelling sort of higher level applications, whether they're social or gaming or what have you, I think there's anticipation that there is, another wave coming at some time in the near future. Certainly from an activity standpoint, it feels that way.
Obviously, Ethereum is one of the biggest, if not arguably the biggest blockchains out there for developer activity. By market cap, it's the second largest behind Bitcoin. I would say there's probably more innovation being done on Ethereum than Bitcoin. I don't know if that's a controversial thing to say, but I'd love to hear your take on how Ethereum is positioning itself within those three sectors we just talked about. And then for Consensys too, what are you doing with your products to kind of get into those areas?
Yeah, so we think about, Joe likes the term metropolitan Ethereum. So we think about Ethereum as an ecosystem, not just about, the L1. So we think about L2s, L3s, app chains, anything that runs the EVM. If you want to run a bunch of EVMs and use Cosmos for inter-blockchain communication, great. That's still from our perspective part of the Ethereum community more broadly. Where we are in the Ethereum community today is volumes on L2s are already bigger than what's on L1s, right? So the future of Ethereum has been fairly well telescribed or telescoped for some time, right? Vitalik posts various updates on where he thinks Ethereum's going, but most of the things that Vitalik's posting about seem to be informed by things he's actually seeing in the community. So there's a really positive feedback loop, and Ethereum's done a pretty good job of, when it sees interesting ideas and other ecosystems that could be useful for Ethereum, of learning about them and seeing how they fit in. So I think what's interesting about Ethereum philosophically, and especially if you hear the foundation speak and what have you, is to try and keep the actual organizing structure as minimal as possible and allow permissionless innovation to come from the builders, and that seems to be working. From a Consensys perspective, in terms of our products, our role, we do spend a lot of work on the protocol level, on all core devs calls, et cetera. But from a product perspective, like many people in the space, we are thinking about what does it look like when you have 1 billion users, and what do those products need to be like, and what do developers need for an environment so that they can build the things that 1 billion people might want to use, and how do you make that happen in a way that is more of a Web3 environment than a Web2 environment. And so, our 2 core products are MetaMask and Infura, and 3 today, including our ZK EVM network, Linea. But what we're really thinking about in the longer term is, how do you think about 1 billion users in Web3? And it was interesting. I was having a conversation with Dan Finley, the founder of MetaMask, one of the founders of MetaMask last week, and we were talking about, well, what will a wallet look like in the future? And I said to him, look, I want to go to a place where I wake up in the morning and I can see all the relevant news about everything that I'm following, everything I hold in my wallet. I've got my NFTs, my art, the games I'm playing, my social, my crypto asset holdings, and what's going on, the DAOs I'm in, what proposals are coming, do I have any work assignments due? He said, look, never once in that did you say, which network am I on, right? And so the tooling that we're dealing with today and the way we interact with these is still, it's still pretty early stage. Like we're seeing things like Rabby and MetaMask and various of the wallets take big steps forward in terms of what true native multi-network looks like, right? But that's not ultimately, but we're at a point in time where you still need to think about it, and that's not where we're going to be when we have 1 billion users, right? Because 1 billion users will not be willing to configure their RPC endpoints. They just won't be. They're going to need something where they come in. Like let's say you log on to a new wallet and you're in South Korea. You're Korean, well, you'd probably like it if it spoke Korean to you, not English. As a general starting point. It would probably be useful if it started with Clayton, right? And it had all the swaps and everything for Clayton right there instead of starting on mainnet, right? Those are the types of things that, the product should do out of the box. They don't today, right? You should have a pretty good idea of like, hey, here are some interesting applications to get started with. This is what's trending right now. This is what's interesting, right? Like that's not what the products do today, and that's what and if we're going to have 1 billion people engaged with them, that's what they will need to be doing in the future. Sorry, I don't know if that really answers the question or not.
That's all right. You kind of talked about in the beginning how you want to be able to like look at your phone and see all these different apps in one place. And Coinbase's CEO, Brian Armstrong, has said that he wants Coinbase to become a super app in the past. And I know we've talked about this before off the stage. Jeremy and I have talked about like super apps. So I'm curious if you see a future where MetaMask can become one of those. And if so, what would that look like? And where's like a roadmap for that?
Yeah, so I'm not the definitive person to talk to about MetaMask, but I certainly have an opinion. I think that your wallet becomes your passport, and it doesn't just become in a virtual way. In that, right now we think about wallets. We've got our wallets on our phones that have our credit cards in them, and then we've got our crypto wallets that we can sign things with, right? But imagine having a totally different type of user experience. So most of our user experiences, at least in Web 2, are driven by news feeds. Right? Instagram is a newsfeed-driven app. TikTok is a newsfeed-driven app, right? Well, what would a newsfeed-driven crypto wallet look like? It would look very different, right? You see a stream of things that are happening in the space, events, alerts, this is happening, this is happening, this is happening, notifications, and you'd click on them and you'd go and take actions in Web3. That's very different than how we think about a wallet today. So I can imagine having a cockpit, a digital dashboard to Web3 that lets me, based on what I hold in my token and maybe some things I've looked at or expressed interest in, lets me see all the activities going on around the things that I care about, so I probably hold the token, and then lets me take actions on them in an intelligent way, so that the software is making my life easy for me and helping me do things I want to do.
I think on that front, though, in looking at a super app, how can that kind of become marketable to mainstream people who aren't in crypto at all? And how can we get to that first billion users? I know everyone calls it the next billion users, but we don't have 1 billion to start with. So,
well, I think there needs to be good things for people to want to do. So, one of the things that people actually, our economy, our world spends a lot of time doing, we spend a lot of time paying for things and investing in things, right? Like financial services is the biggest contributor to global GDP. It's something like 17%, right? Actually, it's more than that. It's a $17 trillion a year industry out of an $80 trillion a year total GDP. So it's like 20% of the global economy. So right there, the good thing is crypto started on some good use cases, some things that people actually need to do every day to get through their lives. And we've already seen quite a lot of adoption around that. But what are the things that have been driving adoption in the last wave? Well, NFTs were one of them. Digital art, digital scarcity, a lot around social, DAOs, ways of moving into a nomadic lifestyle in which your digital reality moves around with you, place to place, and you're participating in DAOs and getting paid. So I think the benefits that come from operating in Web3, where you have self-control, self-sovereignty, privacy, et cetera, what we have to have is compelling user experiences built on those primitives that allow people to live the lives they want to live. And so that the easiest way to live your life the way you want to live it is through Web3, right? And like, if you don't want to have a job and you want to be a creative and you want to be in 5DAOs and you want to collect and trade NFTs, well, I guess you're gonna be doing a lot of stuff in your wallet and on a bunch of websites and on Twitter and stuff that, you know, a Web 2 mindset wouldn't think about. And so I think it's about having the compelling experiences and uses there for people already, right? So we're not thinking about trying to fix things in Web 2. Like, that's a reverse salient. You deal with that later. You think you have to, and I really mean that, like, you deal with that later. You need to focus on the things that are 10 or 100 times better in Web 3 and making those things really slick and compelling. And then people will be using them not because they're cool or innovative, but because they derive a lot of utility from them. I mean, once you've done any sort of complex transaction in DeFi using crypto, you never want to go into a bank again. Because despite the clunkiness of the actual graphics in the user interface, the user experience of being able to watch your transactions settle on Etherscan, see it in your wallet, have the money immediately available for you to do whatever you want, versus going into a bank is so much better. It's so much better already, right? Like, and so what happens when that applies to lots of other components of our life, right? You know, we're going to see that's what I think does it. And so I think our role as a software company is to do two things. It's to create the tools developers need to build those experiences, and then create the end user layer that allows those experiences to be rendered beautifully and easily to the end user.
You kind of talked about Web 2.0 companies and like their involvement in this space. I'm curious, what is the enterprise market like today for those who may want to get into the Ethereum ecosystem or even work with Consensys? Like traditional brands, big brands, what are they trying to say?
Well, I think that's changed a great deal over my time in crypto. So when I started in crypto, every major bank had an innovation lab that was playing around with Bitcoin and Ethereum and tokens. And we started something called the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, and I spent a bunch of time doing that. And then, 2018, 2019, that sort of went away. And then what we saw in like 2021 in particular is like, so who do I think, and when I think of someone doing enterprise crypto today, my favorite company is Nike. I think what Nike is doing with the way they engage with their audience and allow for like now custom sneakers to be forged. If you hold the NFT, you get in at the right time, et cetera. To me, that's really interesting. And so the conversation I want to have with Nike is, how do you, when you do this, you've got your users over here in MetaMask, and then you've got your Nike app, your Nike website, you've got a workflow through it, it goes to the Discord. What do you need us to do in MetaMask to make that work better for your users, right? And that's the conversation. And that's where the conversation, I think, is starting to go. Whereas I think 5 years ago, it was about, can you set up a private chain within my bank so I can try and do some syndicated loan POC? And I think there is still some work going on like that, but it's being much more isolated. I think a lot of that work's shifting to people working on L2 stacks, and I think sort of the private network market, something I'm very passionate about, but I think it's not a very big market, and it's largely going away. So I think, I think about enterprise in our space, in two different ways. One is companies that see what's interesting in Web3 and actually want to participate in Web3. Then the other interesting market is providing tools for Web3 companies. So there's a whole group of companies that are getting funded that do things like build token tables for Web3 companies, run crypto payroll for Web3 companies, do DAO analytics and DAO votings and various things like that. To me, that's a very interesting category because I see Web3 as starting to become an economy that's self-sustaining, where there's enough players in Web3 doing trade with each other that they are making enough money off of the different companies in Web3 that you're starting to get a self-sustaining economy in Web3 itself. And so I'm really interested in the software stack that powers that, and thinking about then, if Nike's out here doing their drops, how does that software, what are the features they need in that software stack for their drops, et cetera, right? So if you're gonna do a drop and you're Nike, you probably need some custody at some point, as an example.
Yeah. Speaking of Nike or just big brands in general, do you think there is a desire from these companies to actually have these like self-controlled environments where they don't have a say in what happens there and it's in a decentralized nature?
I think individual companies will have individual philosophies, and
Yeah,
and we should all, and everyone should be empowered to be their own agent and advocate for their own position on that. But I do think what is interesting is I think there is a certain level of interesting innovation that's not just technical, but that's happening sort of at the cultural and social layer in Web3, which is attractive for certain brands to participate in. And so I think you're seeing you're seeing brands do, and look, all right, the market's different than it was a year and a half ago, but you saw brands doing big collabs with NFT projects, right? So instead of like, well, hey, can you build me a private blockchain? It's like, hey, can you build me a t-shirt, right? It's a slightly different conversation.
Yeah, it's a bit simpler, I would argue. But how has Ethereum's current technology or infrastructure that exists today kind of inhibited itself from taking on the next wave? Sure, we have layer 2s that improve scaling and accessibility of the blockchain, but what do you think is the current hurdles, and how can those developers or who have you like improve that?
So I think you have to separate out between like technical hurdles that the community can solve and sort of systemic risk factors. So I would suggest, other than, obviously our industry went through a tough year last year with some notable failings and collapses that were largely not caused by human error, but human greed and dishonesty. And that has left, caused lots of damage in lots of different ways. But one of the biggest, so that's one headwind. I think the other big headwind has been sort of the regulatory response to that, right, which has made it hard to do anything. And so I would view those extraneous factors as sort of bigger challenges. I think Ethereum has, the nice thing about Ethereum is the fact that it is decentralized as a philosophy inside of the ecosystem itself allows for lots of permissionless innovation to happen around the EVM and around the main chain without anyone being in control, and that's really great. That's really great. And as you point out what's going on with L2s and with app chains, I think that's fantastic. Is there anything specific that's holding the ecosystem back? I mean, I don't feel like there is structurally, and if I thought there was something structural, I would probably be working on that problem, I guess. So I think there are some things around the edges that can always get better, but I think the beauty of the Ethereum ecosystem is the minimalistic approach, the foundation has taken to it, and the amount of sort of permissionless innovation that continues to evolve. And so, no one person really owns the roadmap. Yes, there's a roadmap. Yes, Vitalik presents things, but I think, the people who do that, like there's a reason why the Ethereum community has something called the cat herders, right? Which is a bunch of senior devs that try to go around from conferences and participate in various EIPs and dev calls and stuff to try and keep things sort of on track and organized as some older mentor figures in the community. Literally call themselves cat herders. That's kind of how Ethereum works.
I think kind of going off of that, there's a lot of opportunity for innovation beyond just like finance and technology. sure that is a major asset to the industry and the ecosystem. I will not say that's not true, but how can Ethereum developers build new use cases beyond those two sectors, and what is Consensys kind of doing to also get behind that?
Well, I think, well, I don't think it's the sovereignty of any one company, but I think there is a pervasive philosophy in Web3 around self-sovereignty, privacy preservation, right? Autonomy, self-agency. And I think, and the question is, how are those primitives and beliefs going to surface themselves in things like a next generation social media platform, right? And so I think where you've seen the most successful and the greatest innovation coming around Web3, it's where people have not only built something interesting and engaging as an application, but they've done through in a way that really follows through on the philosophy of community, collaboration, mass coordination, fair economic incentives, et cetera, a set of Web3 principles. And those projects, I think, that I've observed that sort of when you find a way of building something that's interesting from an engagement perspective, that has something innovative, trendy, et cetera, and yet sticks to the principles, I think that's where the really interesting stuff is going to come from.
Do you think that will kind of shift over time and we'll see kind of things that we don't even have existing today arise? I was listening to a conversation this morning about that.
I mean, so like 15 years ago or 20 years ago, social media marketing was not a job category. Now Discord mod is, right? You know, I mean, you know, and you're going to continue to have that. You're going to continue to, you know, smart contract auditor wasn't a job 10 years ago. So for sure, things are going to be developed that the whole point is, I mean, the interesting thing, particularly if you work at the technology level, is seeing where the application breakthroughs really happen. And, you know, quite honestly, I'm not super great at doing that. I'm really good at, like, what I'm really good at is pattern matching and understanding adoption trends in underlying technologies and figuring out what scaling that starts to look like. So I'm usually a bit lost when it comes to actually picking the breakthrough application. So for me, it usually appears somewhere that I don't expect it to.
In the beginning, I brought up 3 sectors that I saw a lot of conversations around, which was Web3 gaming, institutional involvement, and investing in Asia, more specifically Korea. I would love to know, what are 3 categories you're following right now?
Well, I mean, those 3 for sure. Those 3 for sure. I think if I was to add on to that, so I continue to believe, I'm an art lover, so I continue to believe in digital art as a category and NFTs in particular, even if that's less trendy than it was 18 months ago. I think that we're going to see interesting things at the intersection of AI and crypto. Like, people are going to build chatbots, or people already are building like DeFi chatbots. Like, those things kind of already exist. So the intersection of AI and crypto, I think, will be interesting. And then I think we're only just beginning to see sort of DAOs and social really start to scale. And so I think, like, even if that has been a core component of Web3 for a while, I think like the level of proliferation and the amount of activity that's happening there continues to be astonishing.
All right, I guess there's a lot for us to follow there. Jeremy, thank you for taking the time to talk today, and thank you to everyone for listening in.
Thank you.